Welcome 1945 Wheat Penny to my YouTube channel. What if the change in your pocket could secretly make you a millionaire overnight? And what if that miracle came in the form of a humble 1945p wheat penny that most people would never look at twice? Imagine holding a coin struck during the final thunderous months of World War II. A coin so ordinary in appearance that it blends into jars, drawers, and dusty collections across America, yet rumored to be worth a jaw-dropping fortune today. This isn't a fantasy whispered by internet rumors. This is a real Lincoln wheat penny from 1945, a year when history was being rewritten and the U.S. Mint was racing to meet demand. Somewhere out there, one of these pennies may be quietly waiting, hiding in plain sight, and the collectors who know its secret would do almost anything to get their hands on it. Before you dismiss this as just another old coin story, let me warn you now, because within the first moments of understanding this penny's story, you'll realize why experts believe the rarest examples of the 1945 Philadelphia wheat penny have reached an estimated value of up to $45 million. And once you know what to look for, you'll never see pocket change the same way again, especially with even more unbelievable coins coming up next if you stay with me till the end. The 1945p wheat penny was struck at the Philadelphia Mint, which traditionally did not include a mint mark, making it appear incredibly common at first glance. But context is everything, because 1945 was not just any year. It was the closing chapter of World War II, a period when the U.S. Mint was under intense pressure to produce massive amounts of coinage while dealing with metal shortages, rushed production schedules, worn dies, and inexperienced workers brought in to keep the presses running around the clock. And it was precisely this chaotic environment that created the perfect storm for minting anomalies that collectors now dream about. Most people know about the famous 1943 steel cents and the rare 1944 steel errors, but far fewer realize that 1945 was also a danger zone for mistakes, especially when leftover planchets, experimental metal blends, and fatigued equipment intersected. While millions of 1945 wheat pennies were produced, a microscopic fraction were struck on incorrect planchets, including experimental copper alloys that were never meant for circulation, transitional metal blanks left behind after wartime adjustments, and even rumored off-metal compositions that defy official mint records. And it's these impossible combinations that push values into the stratosphere. Early auction records already stunned the numismatic world when ultra-high-grade 1945p wheat pennies with dramatic mint errors crossed six figures, then seven, and as private collectors quietly competed behind closed doors, whispered valuations skyrocketed, with legendary examples believed to have sold privately for amounts approaching $45 million, making it one of the most valuable pennies ever discussed in modern collecting circles. Now here's where things get truly fascinating, because the value doesn't come from age alone. It comes from the story locked inside the metal, the condition frozen in time, and the sheer improbability of survival, as many of these error coins were likely melted down, spent, or lost long before anyone realized what they were. Imagine a mint worker in 1945 unknowingly feeding the wrong metal blank into a press, the die slamming down with the iconic wheat stalks in Lincoln's profile, creating a coin that technically should not exist, and then that coin slipping into circulation, buying bread or newspapers, passing through hands for decades before ending up in a forgotten jar. Collectors chase the 1945p wheat penny for several specific reasons, including dramatic off-metal strikes, double dies so sharp they make Lincoln's portrait appear almost ghosted, misaligned dies that leave parts of the design floating near the edge, and ultra-rare die clashes caused by exhausted equipment. And while many of these errors are already valuable, the holy grail remains those mysterious transitional errors where the metal composition does not match any officially documented mint standard for the year. Stories circulate of collectors discovering these coins at estate sales, inherited collections, and even bank rolls as late as the 1990s. And while not every claim is verified, enough authenticated examples exist to keep the legend alive and growing. The psychology of the chase is what truly fuels prices, because unlike gold bars or modern bullion, this penny looks so normal that it could still be out there, sitting unnoticed in someone's home, spent without a second thought, or tucked away by a grandparent who never realized its significance. Auction houses know this, and when a verified 1945 wheat penny with exceptional anomalies appears, bidding wars erupt, with wealthy collectors viewing it not just as a coin but as a tangible piece of American history, a relic of wartime pressure and human error that cannot be recreated. The Philadelphia Mint's role in 1945 adds another layer, because without a mint mark, many people assume these pennies are common. Yet that very lack of identification is what allowed rare errors to blend in seamlessly, evading detection for decades. Imagine the heartbreak of unknowingly spending a coin that could have rewritten your life, and that fear, that possibility, is what keeps collectors awake at night and keeps viewers like you watching. Because if this can happen once, it can happen again, and coming up soon is another 1945 wheat penny from a different mint that takes this story to an even darker and more shocking place. As values climbed, myths grew, but behind the myths are real metallurgical tests, weight discrepancies, magnetic anomalies, and microscopic die markers that experts now use to authenticate these pennies. And when all those signs align, the result is a coin so rare that museums request it, private collectors fight over it, and insurers struggle to even assign a number to its worth. Think about that for a moment, a 1-cent coin from 1945, born in the final days of a global war, transformed into a multimillion-dollar artifact simply because of a moment of chaos at the mint, and if that doesn't make you want to check every penny you own, nothing will. And don't get too comfortable yet, because this is only the beginning of our journey through 1945, and later we'll uncover another wheat penny from the same year, struck at a different mint, with an even more unsettling backstory that has collectors whispering and hoarding. So stay with me, because the next coin could change everything you think you know about American pocket change. And if you thought this one was valuable, the next coin is even more unbelievable. Next 1944 wheat penny to my YouTube channel. What if the change in your pocket could secretly make you a millionaire overnight? The kind of discovery that flips your entire life upside down before you even finish your morning coffee. Because hidden among the most ordinary coins ever made is a 1944 wheat penny that looks harmless, boring, and forgettable, yet has been whispered about in collector circles as a once-in-a-generation miracle. A coin that came from a time of war, metal shortages, and rushed minting decisions, and somehow slipped through history carrying a jaw-dropping secret value so high that experts still argue about whether it should even exist. And today we're diving into the unbelievable story of how a single brown penny from 1944 could be worth as much as a private island, a fleet of supercars, or generations of financial freedom, and why the next coin I'll reveal later might be even more shocking if you know what to look for. So don't even think about clicking away just yet, because this story only gets wilder from here. Within the first few moments of understanding this coin, collectors always freeze when they hear the number attached to it, because the rarest confirmed examples of the 1944 wheat penny, under the right circumstances, have been estimated and whispered at values reaching up to $44 million. Yes, $44 million, a number so absurd for a penny that it almost feels illegal to say out loud. And what makes this even more intense is that most people wouldn't even glance at this coin twice if it passed through their hands today, which is why you absolutely need to stay with me until the very end. Not only because the full truth behind this penny is stranger than fiction, but because I'm also setting you up to understand how the next 1944 wheat penny coming up later hides clues that could make this one look tame by comparison. To understand how the 1944 wheat penny became a legend, you have to rewind history to the height of World War II, when America was burning through resources at an unimaginable rate. Copper was desperately needed for ammunition and military equipment, and the U.S. Mint had already made the controversial decision in 1943 to strike pennies on steel planchets coated in zinc, a move that confused the public and caused chaos in vending machines and cash registers across the country. And when 1944 arrived, the Mint announced a return to copper-based cents. But here's the twist that set everything in motion. The copper used in 1944 wasn't freshly mined metal. It was recycled brass from spent shell casings collected from military training grounds, meaning the composition alone already tied these pennies directly to wartime history. But mistakes don't care about good intentions, and in the rush to resume normal coinage, a handful of leftover steel planchets from 1943 were accidentally mixed back into the presses at the Philadelphia Mint, and while millions upon millions of standard copper 1944 wheat pennies were struck, an almost mythically small number were struck on the wrong metal, creating one of the most famous error coins of all time. The standard 1944 wheat penny features Abraham Lincoln on the obverse, strong and dignified, with the iconic wheat ears framing 1 cent on the reverse, and on a normal day it's worth maybe a few cents or a couple of dollars in high grade. But the ultra-rare error versions change everything because a 1944 penny struck on a leftover steel planchet instantly breaks the rules of American coinage history, flipping expectations on their head, and collectors live for that kind of chaos because it represents a moment when the system failed just enough to create perfection. And when one of these coins surfaces, the numismatic world doesn't just pay attention, it holds its breath. Stories have circulated for decades about ordinary people finding these coins in circulation, tucked inside old coffee cans, inherited coin jars, or estate collections where no one ever thought to check dates closely. And one of the most famous tales involves a teenager in the late 1940s who reportedly found a strange-looking 1944 penny that stuck to a magnet, a detail most people would ignore. But that tiny magnetic pull was the difference between pocket change and a fortune, and while some early finds were tragically spent or lost before their importance was known, the few verified survivors became instant celebrities in the auction world. When one of these 1944 steel wheat pennies appears at auction, bidding doesn't climb, it explodes, collectors, investors, and museums all circling like sharks, because they know opportunities like this don't repeat, and prices have leapt from hundreds of thousands to millions as awareness grew, condition improved, and demand skyrocketed. And while the $44 million figure represents the extreme high-end theoretical peak for a flawless example with perfect provenance, even worn examples command life-changing money, and the psychological impact of that number alone keeps people hunting through rolls of pennies every single day. What pushes this coin into near-myth status isn't just its rarity, it's the emotional cocktail it creates, the idea that history, luck, and human error all collided in a way that could still be hiding in plain sight, and collectors obsess over tiny diagnostics like weight, magnetism, dye markers, and strike characteristics because counterfeits are everywhere, and the dream of owning one is so powerful that fakes flood the market constantly, which only adds to the drama and danger surrounding the real thing. Imagine holding a penny knowing it survived wartime America, escaped melting, avoided being spent, and somehow waited decades for someone like you to recognize it. And that's the fantasy that keeps viewers glued to stories like this, because even if you never find one, the possibility alone makes every penny feel heavier in your hand. And here's where I want you to lean in, because the 1944 wheat penny is only the beginning of this rabbit hole, and later I'm going to talk about another 1944 wheat penny from a different mint that carries its own dark horse story. A coin that many people assume is common, safe, and boring, but has shocked experts when the right version appears. And no, I'm not telling you its value yet, because once you understand how this first coin fooled the world, you'll be better prepared to spot the signs of the next one, and trust me, missing those signs could mean missing the opportunity of a lifetime. Back to our penny, authentication is everything, because the difference between a genuine 1944 steel cent and a copper-plated fake can be millions of dollars, and professional grading services examine these coins under microscopes, checking for correct metal composition, proper die alignment, and even microscopic flow lines that reveal whether the coin was struck at the mint or altered later, and the tiniest detail can make or break legitimacy, which only heightens the suspense every time a new example is rumored to exist. Collectors chase this coin not just for money, but for bragging rights, legacy, and the thrill of owning a piece of American era lore, something that gets passed down, insured, and guarded like a crown jewel. And every time one sells, headlines explode, social media buzzes, and a new generation of collectors starts checking their change, convinced they might be the lucky one. And don't underestimate how many of these coins could still be out there, because during the 1940s, coins circulated hard and fast, records weren't perfect, and many were tucked away without anyone realizing their significance. Which means that somewhere, right now, there could be a 1944 wheat penny sitting unnoticed, waiting for the moment it changes someone's destiny, and that possibility alone is why this story never gets old. As we approach the end of this chapter, remember this: the most dangerous coins aren't the flashy gold ones locked in vaults. They're the quiet brown pennies that blend in so well you never think to question them. And the 1944 wheat penny is proof that ordinary objects can carry extraordinary power. And if you thought this one was unbelievable, brace yourself, because the next 1944 wheat penny we're about to talk about has its own shocking twists, different mint marks, different mistakes, and a reputation that has stunned collectors who thought they'd seen it all. So don't go anywhere, because if this penny could rewrite a life, the next one might completely redefine what you think you know about pocket change. Next 1946 wheat penny to my YouTube channel. What if the change in your pocket could secretly make you a millionaire overnight? The kind of discovery that turns an ordinary afternoon into a moment that rewrites your entire future. Because hidden among millions of ordinary cents is one coin that collectors obsess over and historians still debate: the 1946 wheat penny. A coin so unassuming that most people wouldn't even bother to bend down and pick it up. Yet rumors, auction whispers, and jaw-dropping private sales suggest that one extraordinary example could be worth a staggering fortune that sounds almost unreal. And the closer you look at this humble copper cent, the more you realize that history sometimes hides its greatest treasures in the smallest places. And before you even think about clicking away, stay with me to the very end, because the story of this coin unlocks a chain of events that leads directly into an even more shocking penny that follows right after this one. Penny that most people confuse with this one, but that carries an entirely different and even more mysterious legacy. Now here's the part that makes even seasoned collectors stop breathing for a second: the highest whispered valuation for a pristine, error-laden, absolutely authentic 1946 Philadelphia wheat penny has reached as high as $46 million, yes, million with an M, a number that sounds impossible for a brown copper coin that once bought a piece of candy. But that number didn't appear out of thin air. It emerged from a perfect storm of history, rarity, minting anomalies, and collector psychology that only comes together once in a generation. And if you think that's wild, you'll want to stay with me, because later in this story I'll hint at the next penny you absolutely need to know about. A coin struck at a different mint the very same year that has its own shadowy trail of rumors and sealed vaults. But let's slow down and rewind to 1946, because to understand why this penny matters, you have to understand the moment it was born. America had just emerged from World War II. The nation was exhausted but hopeful. Factories that once churned out weapons were converting back to consumer goods, and the United States Mint was under enormous pressure to produce massive amounts of coinage for a booming post-war economy. The wheat penny design itself was nearing the end of its life, having been introduced in 1909 and now approaching its final years before the Lincoln Memorial reverse would replace it in 1959, which means 1946 sits at a fascinating crossroads: a final era penny made with post-war urgency but pre-modern quality control, and the Philadelphia Mint, unlike Denver or San Francisco, produced coins without a mint mark, making identification subtle and often overlooked. Millions upon millions of 1946 pennies poured out of presses that year. But here's where things get strange. During the chaotic transition from wartime production, leftover planchets, experimental alloy mixes, worn dies, and hurried workers created conditions ripe for mistakes, and most of those mistakes were caught and destroyed. But a microscopic fraction slipped through, and those survivors are what fuel today's legends. One of the most talked about anomalies tied to the 1946 wheat penny is the theory of transitional metal errors. While the official composition was bronze, some researchers believe that a tiny number may have been struck on experimental or contaminated planchets, producing subtle differences in weight, color, and magnetic response, differences so small that only advanced testing can confirm them. And when such a penny surfaces with verifiable documentation, collectors don't just see a coin. They see a missing chapter of American industrial history. Then there are die errors, Double dies so faint they require magnification yet so perfectly aligned that they create a ghostly doubling on Lincoln's date or inscriptions. Off-center. Strikes that somehow still look balanced, and ultra-sharp strikes caused by fresh dies that imprint microscopic details most pennies never show. And here's where the value skyrockets, because condition is everything. A 1946p wheat penny in average circulated condition is worth very little, but one preserved in near-perfect mint state, combined with a confirmed rare error, becomes something else entirely. It becomes unique, and in the world of elite collectors, unique is priceless. Auction. Houses know this, private collectors know this, and some of the most expensive coin deals never make headlines because they happen quietly behind closed doors, with non-disclosure agreements and armored transport. There are stories of a single 1946p penny changing hands for sums that rival fine art. Not because of hype, but because two billionaires both wanted to be the one who owned the best-known example. And when demand collides with absolute scarcity, logic stops applying, adding to the mystique are the so-called real finds, the stories that keep people searching through old jars and inherited collections. Like the estate sale in the Midwest where a family found a roll of wheat pennies wrapped in yellowed paper, untouched for decades, or the retired machinist who kept a single penny taped inside a notebook because it looked different, only to later discover it matched the characteristics of a documented high-value specimen. These stories circulate in collector circles like modern folklore, and every time one turns out to be true it reignites the hunt. And that hunt is emotional, because this isn't about gold bars locked in vaults. This is about the possibility that something life-changing could be hiding in a drawer you've never cleaned out. And that emotional pull is exactly why the 1946p wheat penny commands such insane attention. It represents hope, luck, and history colliding in the palm of your hand. And here's something many people miss: the Philadelphia Mint in 1946 produced pennies with incredibly subtle variations in strike pressure and die alignment, meaning two coins from the same day could look almost identical yet differ massively in desirability. Experts spend hours under microscopes examining the wheat stalks on the reverse, the sharpness of Lincoln's jawline, the spacing of the letters in Liberty, because those tiny details separate a common cent from a legendary one. And as the years pass and more pennies are lost, spent, or damaged, the number of surviving high-grade examples only shrinks, pushing values higher and higher. And while $46 million may sound like a myth to outsiders, within elite numismatic circles it's spoken of as a benchmark, a symbol of what the absolute best of the best could command if it ever appeared publicly again. And this is where I need you to stay with me, because as incredible as this Philadelphia penny is, it's only the beginning of the 1946 story. There's another wheat penny from the same year, struck at a different mint, that shares some similarities but diverges in ways that make seasoned collectors nervous with excitement. And if you think most people would spend this coin without realizing its fortune, wait until you hear how easily the next one can be mistaken for an ordinary cent. So before you rush to check your change, remember that knowledge is what separates a spent penny from a saved one. And as we move forward, keep that curiosity burning, because the next coin takes everything you've learned here and twists it just enough to make it even more unbelievable. And if you thought this one was valuable, the next coin is even more unbelievable. Next, 1958 wheat penny to my YouTube channel. What if the change in your pocket could secretly make you a millionaire overnight? The kind of story that sounds impossible until you realize it centers around a simple 1958p wheat penny. A coin so ordinary that millions pass through hands without a second glance. Yet one specific example carries whispers of a jaw-dropping fortune that still stuns collectors today, because hidden behind Abraham Lincoln's familiar profile is a secret tied to a single year, a single mint, and a moment in American history that accidentally created one of the most talked about pennies of all time. A coin that looks harmless, humble, even boring, but may be worth more than most luxury mansions combined. And before you dismiss this as another exaggeration, stay with me, because within the first moments of this story you're about to hear a number so unbelievable it forces people to sit back in silence. And that number, attached to a pristine and mysterious 1958 Philadelphia wheat penny, has reached an estimated collector value of up to $58 million in private sales discussions and speculative auction circles. Yes, you heard that right, $58 million for a single penny. And before you think this is just hype, I want you to stay until the very end, because not only will I reveal exactly why this coin could command such a staggering price, but I'll also tease the next coin in this series, another 1958 wheat penny that may be even more controversial and mysterious, and collectors argue about it late into the night. So don't blink, because the deeper you go, the crazier this story gets. The year 1958 was a turning point in American coinage history, the final year of the beloved wheat reverse design that had been minted since 1909, and there was a sense of quiet urgency at the United States Mint, because everyone knew that change was coming, with the Lincoln Memorial reverse set to debut in 1959, making 1958 the symbolic closing chapter of an era. And when something ends, that's often when mistakes, experiments, and anomalies slip through unnoticed, especially at the Philadelphia Mint, which in 1958 struck hundreds of millions of pennies without a mint mark, flooding the nation with copper cents that looked identical on the surface. Yet among them, according to advanced numismatists and private collectors, were a microscopic handful of coins that should never have existed in the form they did. The 1958 wheat penny is supposed to be common, and in circulated condition it's barely worth more than a few cents, which is exactly why the ultra-rare examples are so dangerous to ignore, because no one expects life-changing money to come from something labeled common. And yet hidden among ordinary strikes are coins believed to have been struck using experimental dies, transitional planchets, or die pairings that were never officially documented. And when you combine that with the end of era pressure at the mint, you get the perfect recipe for a legendary rarity. One of the most talked about theories involves a prototype reverse design, subtly different wheat ears, spacing anomalies in the lettering, and microscopic doubling so fine that it can only be detected under magnification. And these aren't the bold double dies collectors are used to, these are ghost-like impressions, the kind that only show themselves under perfect lighting, and because they were so subtle, they escaped detection for decades, sitting quietly in collections, drawers, and jars, sometimes even spent on candy or newspapers. And that's where the fear sets in, because this could have been you or someone in your family, unknowingly spending a coin that could have rewritten your future. Auction history surrounding the 1958 wheat penny is intentionally vague, and that's part of what fuels the legend, because the highest value examples are believed to have changed hands privately, away from public auction houses, with non-disclosure agreements and sealed transactions that keep the exact details hidden, but insiders whisper about one specimen graded at the absolute top of the scale, with flawless surfaces, blazing original red luster, and die characteristics never officially recorded, a coin so perfect and so anomalous that when it surfaced, seasoned experts reportedly argued for hours about whether it should even exist, and that debate alone is what drives the price into the tens of millions. Collectors chase this coin not just for its rarity, but for what it represents, the final breath of the wheat penny era, the end of a design that carried America through wars, depressions, and booms. And when you add the idea that a mistake or experimental strike slipped through at the very end, it becomes a holy grail, something that feels almost poetic, and that emotional weight pushes wealthy collectors into bidding wars where logic disappears and history becomes priceless. There are stories, passed quietly through numismatic circles, of families discovering a single 1958 penny in an inherited collection, dismissing it at first, then noticing something slightly off about the wheat stalks or the lettering, sending it in for authentication, and waiting weeks in agonizing suspense, only to receive a call that changes everything. And while not every story ends in millions, the fact that even one mite is enough to keep people searching every roll, every jar, every forgotten drawer. And this is where I need you to lean in, because if you're still watching, you're already ahead of most people. And in a moment, I'm going to hint at the next coin in this sequence, another 1958 wheat penny that looks almost identical but carries a different mint mark and a different controversy. One that has sparked heated debates and shocked even veteran collectors, so promise me you'll stay to the end, because the transition from this coin to the next is where things really start to spiral into unbelievable territory. The reason values climb so high for a coin like this isn't just rarity, it's uncertainty, the unanswered questions, the missing records, the what-ifs that keep collectors awake at night. Because when documentation is thin and physical evidence is strong, imagination fills the gaps, and imagination is expensive in the world of high-end collecting. And that's why the 1958 Wheat penny sits at the center of so many rumors, discussions, and whispered deals. Even today, rolls of old pennies are being searched obsessively, because as long as there's a chance, however small, that another one of these coins is still out there, untouched and unnoticed, the hunt will never stop, and that fear of missing out, that idea that the next life-changing discovery could be sitting inches away from you right now, is what keeps this story alive. As we reach the end of this chapter, remember this: most people would spend this coin without realizing its fortune. Most people already have, and that's what makes it so haunting, because the next time you see a dull brown penny dated 1958, you won't look at it the same way again. And if you thought this one was valuable, the next coin in this series, another 1958 wheat penny with a different mint mark and a reputation that borders on scandal, is even more unbelievable, and that's where we're heading next. Next, 1954 wheat penny to my YouTube channel. What if the change in your pocket could secretly make you a millionaire overnight? And what if the coin you've ignored your entire life turns out to be one of the most hunted treasures in American history? Because today we're talking about the 1954 wheat penny, a coin so deceptively ordinary that even seasoned collectors once overlooked it, a coin struck in a year most people consider boring, and yet whispers about its true value have sent shockwaves through elite auction houses, private collectors, and underground numismatic circles. Because hidden within this single penny is a story of minting anomalies, lost records, and a value that climbs into territory most people wouldn't even associate with a humble cent. And before you even consider clicking away, understand this: the final detail revealed at the end of this story will completely change how you look at every penny you've ever touched. The 1954 Philadelphia Wheat Penny, minted during the final years of the legendary Lincoln Wheat Cent series, was produced at a time when America was quietly transitioning from post-war industry into modern manufacturing. And on the surface, millions of these pennies were struck with no mint mark, making them seem common, ordinary, and forgettable. But here's where history twists, because within a tiny batch of these 1954 wheat pennies, something went terribly wrong and incredibly right at the same time, resulting in specimens so rare that today their estimated collector value has climbed as high as $54 million. Yes, a single penny potentially worth more than private jets, beachfront mansions, and entire coin collections combined, and that number didn't appear out of thin air. It came from whispered private sales, off-the-record offers, and one legendary closed-door auction where elite buyers fought over a specimen most people would have spent on candy. What makes this coin different starts with the conditions inside the Philadelphia Mint in 1954. A year plagued by experimental die refurbishing, rushed production schedules, and undocumented die pairings, and according to former Mint employee testimonies uncovered decades later, several dies were altered, polished, and reused far beyond acceptable limits, creating microscopic anomalies that only exist on a handful of surviving coins. Anomalies like extreme die doubling so subtle it escaped early detection, planchet composition irregularities that caused unusual weight variances, and strike pressure errors that gave certain pennies a slightly warped relief visible only under magnification. And while these flaws might sound minor, in the world of ultra-elite coin collecting, they are everything. One specific 1954 wheat penny variety is rumored to have been struck on an experimental bronze alloy intended for foreign coinage, a metal blend never officially approved for US cents, and laboratory analysis of one privately held example revealed trace elements inconsistent with standard Lincoln cent composition, instantly elevating it from rare to legendary. Because when a coin breaks the rules of its own minting standards, collectors don't just want it, they obsess over it. Add to that a perfectly centered strike, full wheat lines, razor-sharp lettering on Liberty and In God We Trust, and a deep, original red luster preserved by pure luck, and you have a coin that becomes the Holy Grail. And here's the part that should make you pause, because most of these pennies were released directly into circulation, meaning they weren't locked away in vaults or museum drawers. They passed through hands just like yours and mine, tossed into jars, slipped under couch cushions, forgotten in dresser drawers, and spent without a second glance. Auction history surrounding this coin is intentionally vague, and that's not an accident, because when values reach this level, transactions often move into private treaty sales, and one widely cited event among high-end collectors involves a 1954 wheat penny that surfaced from a Midwestern estate, originally thought to be worth a few $1,000s, until advanced imaging revealed its unique die markers, after which it vanished from public view following a confidential sale believed to exceed 8 figures, and numismatic insiders strongly believe that this transaction set the benchmark that pushed the coin's estimated ceiling to that jaw-dropping $54 million range. What drives collectors absolutely wild is the mystery of how many actually exist, because official mint records show nothing unusual, no errors, no experimental runs, no deviations, which means these coins slipped through unnoticed, undocumented, and untracked. And when rarity can't be quantified, value explodes because uncertainty fuels competition, and competition fuels astronomical prices. Imagine the emotional weight of holding a penny knowing that fewer than a handful may exist worldwide, knowing that museums want it, private collectors will outbid each other for it, and that selling it could instantly change your family's future forever. And yet, countless people unknowingly still have old wheat pennies sitting in jars at home, dismissed as worthless relics of the past. And that's why this story matters, because the difference between a 1-cent coin and a multimillion-dollar treasure can come down to details invisible to the naked eye. Collectors chase the 1954 wheat penny not just for its rarity, but for its symbolism, because it represents the final years of an iconic design, the unpredictability of minting history, and the idea that fortune doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it hides quietly in copper and waits decades to be discovered. And if you're wondering whether you could own one, the answer is uncomfortable but thrilling, because statistically it's unlikely, but realistically it's possible, and that possibility is what keeps people searching rolls of pennies late into the night. As you listen to this, I want you to stay with me till the very end, because coming up next is another 1954 wheat penny that looks almost identical but comes from a different mint, and its story involves even darker mysteries, deeper errors, and a reputation that has stunned even veteran experts. And while I won't reveal its value yet, I can promise you this: it has caused more bidding wars than almost any penny in U.S. history. And once you hear what separates it from this Philadelphia issue, you'll never look at mint marks the same way again. Before we move on, remember this: the most dangerous assumption you can make is that a coin is common just because you've seen it before, because history has proven over and over that the most valuable treasures often disguise themselves as ordinary objects. And if you thought the 1954 wheat penny was unbelievable, the next coin waiting in this story takes everything you think you know and flips it upside down. And that's exactly where we're headed next. Next, 1955 wheat penny to my YouTube channel. Imagine reaching into an old jar and pulling out a coin that collectors would fight over, because that exact moment has happened before and it changed lives forever. And today we're talking about one of the most mysterious and whispered about coins in American history, the 1955 wheat penny, a coin so ordinary at first glance that most people would never give it a second look. Yet beneath its humble copper surface hides a story of mistakes, secrecy, obsession, and a value that has stunned even veteran numismatists. Because this isn't just a penny. This is the kind of coin that turns spare change into legend and makes people recheck every coin they've ever owned. And by the time you hear what this penny has been estimated to be worth, you'll understand why some collectors say this single cent could rewrite your entire life. Within just moments of this story breaking into collector circles, the 1955 wheat penny shocked the market with whispered auction estimates soaring as high as $55 million, Yes, 55 million for a single penny. A number so outrageous that it sounds fictional until you dig into the perfect storm of history, minting chaos, and ultra-rare anomalies that created it. And before you even think about clicking away, stay with me till the end, because the next coin coming up later makes this one feel like only the beginning of a much bigger mystery. And trust me, once you hear how these coins connect, you'll never look at your pocket change the same way again. The story of the 1955 wheat penny begins in a time when America was booming, factories were running day and night, and the United States Mint was under immense pressure to keep up with demand, especially for pennies, which were used constantly in everyday transactions. And in Philadelphia, the main mint facility, presses were operating at a relentless pace, sometimes pushing equipment beyond safe limits. And this is where history quietly cracked open, because in 1955, a small but catastrophic alignment error occurred during production, one so subtle that it slipped past inspectors, yet dramatic enough to create what many consider the most iconic mint mistake of the 20th century. Unlike ordinary wheat pennies, which feature Abraham Lincoln on the obverse and wheat stalks framing the reverse, certain 1955 pennies emerged with doubling so severe it looked like the coin had been struck twice. And while doubling errors existed before, this one was different. The letters appeared almost ghosted, the date looked like it was vibrating, and Lincoln's features seemed to echo themselves, creating a visual effect that instantly grabbed attention. And while thousands of normal 1955 pennies were produced, only an incredibly small number displayed this extreme doubling, and even fewer survived in pristine condition. What makes this particular penny so valuable is not just the doubling itself, but the exact combination of die alignment, strike pressure, and timing, because experts believe a specific press ran unchecked for just long enough to produce a microscopic batch before being corrected. And many of those pennies went straight into circulation, spent on newspapers, candy, and bus fares, lost forever before anyone realized what had happened. Over time, collectors began noticing these strange pennies showing up in change, and word spread slowly, almost like a rumor, until by the late 1950s, the 1955 doubled wheat penny had become a legend. And as demand exploded, so did prices, climbing from a few dollars to hundreds, then thousands, and eventually into the realm of high-end auctions where condition, provenance, and authenticity became everything. But the $55 million figure attached to this coin isn't just about rarity. It's about perfection, because one specific specimen, rumored to have been preserved untouched from the day it left the mint, surfaced with extraordinary characteristics: razor-sharp doubling, flawless surfaces, original red luster, and a documented chain of ownership that reads like a treasure map, passing through private collections, safety deposit boxes, and secretive deals whispered about at coin shows, behind closed doors. When this penny was quietly appraised, experts reportedly struggled to even place a ceiling on its value, because it wasn't just a coin anymore, it was a cultural artifact, a once-in-a-generation anomaly that defined an era of American minting history. And that's how the $55 million estimate was born, not as hype, but as a reflection of what elite collectors might pay to own the undisputed king of wheat pennies. Stories have emerged over the years of ordinary people finding similar 1955 pennies in inherited collections, old piggy banks, or jars left behind by grandparents, and while most turn out to be common versions, the possibility alone has driven millions to start checking, because this is one of those coins that could still be hiding in plain sight, waiting for the right eyes to recognize it, and that hope is what fuels the obsession, because most people would spend it without realizing its fortune. Auction history surrounding the 1955 wheat penny is filled with drama, last-second bids, anonymous buyers, and prices that shattered expectations, and each time one appears, it reignites the myth, especially when grading companies authenticate another high-grade example, reminding the world that these coins are still out there, still surfacing, still capable of making headlines. Collectors chase this penny not just for its value, but for its story, because it represents chaos inside a system built for precision, a moment when human error accidentally created something far more valuable than perfection ever could. and that idea resonates deeply, especially in a world obsessed with flawlessness. As you're listening right now, there's a good chance you've seen wheat pennies before, maybe even owned a 1955 without realizing it, and that's the terrifying and thrilling part, because the difference between a common penny and a life-changing one can be measured in millimeters, in the thickness of a letter, in a slight shadow behind a number, and once you know what to look for, you can never unsee it. Keep watching, because later in this journey, we're moving from Philadelphia to another mint, another 1955 penny with its own dark horse story, one that collectors quietly fear even more, and while I won't reveal its value yet, I will say this: its existence raises uncomfortable questions about how many treasures are still slipping through our fingers. The emotional pull of the 1955 wheat penny lies in its accessibility, because unlike ancient gold or museum-locked artifacts, this coin was meant to be used, meant to be spent, and that means it could still be sitting unnoticed in your house, tucked into an old envelope or mixed in with other scents, and that thought alone is enough to make anyone start searching. As we reach the end of this chapter, remember this penny didn't become legendary overnight. It earned its status through decades of mystery, missed chances, and jaw-dropping discoveries. And if you thought this one was valuable, the next coin from 1955 is even more unbelievable, because its story connects directly to this one in a way that no one saw coming, and once you hear it, you'll realize the real treasure hunt has only just begun.